Asking AI to do data analytics on college football, Week 1, August 30th, 2025. Hello, in this video, I'm going to show you what I found when I performed data analytics with the assistance of Google Gemini and ChatGPT. I used artificial intelligence as an assistant to carry out the data analytics that I had in mind. And the results were fascinating and focused on the performance of underdogs against the point spread and their ability to win the games and generate higher money line winnings. First, this chart shows all the data points for all the games in Week 1 of college football. On the bottom is the point spread, and on the side is cover. So from a point spread of 0 to over 50, you're going to see how often the different teams covered. And as you can see, they're scattered all over the chart. So this is a visual representation of the R and the R squared analysis, which basically shows that there's no correlation, almost zero correlation, between point spread and the ability of underdog teams to cover. What this means is that if you just bet underdogs across the board, you gain no benefit. In fact, in Week 1, underdogs and favorites covered 50-50. So underdogs covered 50% of the time and favorites covered 50% of the time. So you can't just bet underdogs across the board or favorites across the board. You need to do additional analysis. Now, this is only Week 1 of 1 year, but this is an interesting finding. You can't just assume that underdogs will, betting underdogs mindlessly will generate profits. The next thing that I did was to go a little bit deeper, and I said, okay, what's the probability of covering over 3.5 points, basically covering the point spread, versus the point spread range? And interestingly, less than 20, if the point spread is less than 20, the probability of covering the spread for the underdog was less than 50%. So once you hit over a point spread of over 20, that's when the underdogs start covering at a higher percentage. So again, less than 20, underdogs covered less than 50% of the time, but 20 and higher, underdogs covered more than 50% of the time. Interesting finding. So here's a breakdown. So if you look at basically 20.5, if the point spread is 20.5 to 26.5, about 2/3 of the time or 3/4 of the time, the underdog covered. And this is in Week 1. And then we see in the ranges of 32.5 to 34.5, around 33, 100% of the time did the underdogs cover. And then around 49 to 50, underdogs covered 100% of the time. So an interesting finding here is 20 is 3 touchdowns. So that seems to, for Week 1, that seems to be a sweet spot for covering the point spread. And interestingly, at the very high point spreads of around 50, you got 100% coverage of the point spread. But then less than 20, if the point spread is less than 20, then the probability of covering the point spread is less than 50%. This is a fascinating finding. I did not expect it. That's why it's good to visualize and also go deeper into the data. Now let's move on. So previously my discussion was about underdogs covering the point spread. So let's say the point spread was 10. The underdog was able to, maybe they lost, but they only lost by 3 points, so they covered. But I was interested in how often do the underdogs win the game. Okay, it turns out that underdogs won the game nine times this first week, which corresponds to about 10% of the games. And interestingly, this only happened from point spread 0 to 15.5. So at 15.5, there was one team that won. They won the whole game. At 14, a point spread of 14, 2 games won, and at 13.5, there was one team, and then you see 10.5, and then lower. So it's interesting. So between 10 and 14, like 2 touchdowns, a touchdown and a field goal, you're getting teams that win games. But if you go above 15.5, none of those teams win those games, indicating that if it's a team is a very large underdog, they're just too weak to actually overcome the point spread and winning. But what this indicates, just based on week 1 of one season, if you see a team that's a 10-point underdog or a 14-point underdog, but you think that they are very strong versus a team that's overrated, consider doing a money line. But why do this? Okay, just back up. Again, 9 times this happened, and about 10% of the time, the underdogs won the game. So why care about underdogs? Because the advantage of underdogs, the advantage of focusing on underdogs versus favorites is that if you do a money line on an underdog, you can get a much higher payout when you do the money line. So as you see here, if in this situation where a team is a 15.5 underdog and they win the game, your money line payout is plus 550. That means if you bet 100, you will win 550. So 2 touchdowns, 14 point spread, it's a plus 500 situation. So if you pick right, you're going to get a much higher payout. It's basically like a home run. Whereas when you win against the point spread, it's like hitting singles in baseball. But if you're able to get a 10-point underdog or 14-point underdog, it's like getting a triple or a home run. So just to show you that it can happen, these are the teams that actually, these are the 3 teams that won the largest point spread, overcame the largest point spread, basically the largest upsets. So the first one was Austin Peay. They were a underdog by 15.5. They beat Middle Tennessee, so that payout would have been plus 550. And then Tarleton State beat Army. They were a 14-point underdog, and Central Michigan beat San Jose State, and they were a 14-point underdog. And that payout would have been plus 500. This information is from VegasInsider.com, and so the way to read it is once you go to their college football scoreboard for the week, and then you look under the column ATS/OU, and then C: is going to tell you how much it covered by. So under odds, you'll see the point spread. So Middle Tennessee is minus 15.5. Austin Peay won. That's why you see this yellow triangle. And they covered the C by 35.5 points. So the moral of the story is this. The underdogs, to summarize, if you're just doing across-the-board underdogs without doing further analysis, it's 50-50. There's no main benefit. So why pursue underdogs? I do believe that as a season, there is a psychological advantage to selecting underdogs because, in general, from a motivational standpoint, in general, teams want to win games. They don't necessarily need to cover large point spreads. So if a team is up 2 to 3 touchdowns, they tend to put their backups in. And they basically relax a little bit, whereas the underdog is trying to avoid embarrassment, and they try to at least cover or get closer. So that's the psychological motivation behind it. Also, for me, maybe different for other people, I love underdogs. So in my mind, I just have to answer one question: is this team good enough to cover? Is this team good enough to not get beaten by 3 touchdowns or 2 touchdowns? For me, that's an easy question to answer when I do analysis. It's a little bit harder for me to figure out, can this team win by 3 touchdowns? So for me, that makes the analysis easier for me because I'm always looking for underdogs. But the additional advantage of money law, of having the underdog or perspective, is if you can pick the money line, you can get a plus 300 or plus 500 payout. Now, if you look in the description box below, I will present to you useful web links, specifically the ones that I use to, the data sources that I use for the sports scores and the point spread information. I will let you know that my specific interests relate to sports, MLB, college football, NFL, NHL, hockey, the stock market, and also technology, but specifically using technology to solve real-world problems. And also, I enjoy coming up with step-by-step instructions on how to use that technology. So practical applications and education of the practical applications of technology.